Every village has a winter. It never speaks about, a season so dark and unforgiving that memory itself tries to bury it. But in the Bavarian mountains, the snow remembers everything, waiting patiently for the moment it is ready to return. Winter arrives like a sentence passed without appeal. Roads vanish, sound dies, and silence spreads so completely it feels deliberate, as if something ancient beneath the mountains has begun to wake. The village of Ibenwald has survived war, hunger, and isolation for centuries. Yet every winter carries the same unspoken truth. The elders never teach their children. The mountains always collect what they are owed. At the edge of the village stands the Keller house, older than the road and older than the church bell, built around deep foundations and promises, whispered carefully enough that everyone pretended they were never made. Anneliese Keller lights the candles, one by one, not for warmth or comfort, but because darkness listens when rituals are forgotten, and tonight the house feels aware in a way it has not for years. Johann Keller sits at the table in silence, his hands motionless and his eyes fixed on the floorboards. A man who learned long ago that silence can feel safer than truth when the house itself seems to listen and remember things he would rather forget. Matthias Keller arrives as the storm sharpens around the village, carrying years of distance and unfinished arguments back home with him, already feeling the familiar weight of a house that never truly allowed him to leave or forget what waited inside. Greta follows close behind Matthias, one hand resting protectively on her belly, feeling the cold settle deeper than skin as she senses the night pressing in around her, offering a warning she cannot yet understand but instinctively trusts. Behind them, the village seals itself shut, doors locking and shutters closing one by one, because on nights like this, survival has always meant pretending you saw nothing, heard nothing, and owed nothing to the mountains watching from above. High above the village, the church bell rings again, slow and measured, even though no one pulls the rope anymore and no one dares to ask why the sound still carries across the snow, heavy with memory and unspoken obligation. Inside the Keller house, the bell changes, no longer coming from above, but from beneath the floorboards, vibrating gently through the wood and settling into the room until it feels uncomfortably personal. Anneliese feels the vibration before she hears it, her fingers tightening around the rosary as she whispers a name she promised herself would never speak aloud again. The word settles into the room without echo or apology. Krampus remembered at last, patient and waiting, as if the house itself has been listening for that name to be spoken. Matthias forces a laugh into the air, but the sound dies halfway out of his mouth, fear catching it instantly and leaving behind a silence that feels heavier than any noise. Greta's eyes drift to a small carved figurine on the shelf, and she remembers the stories every child grows up hearing. Stories meant to stay safely in the past where they belong. Outside the Keller house, something moves slowly through the yard, too tall and too deliberate to belong there, snow bending beneath its weight, while the storm works hard to hide what should not be seen. Johann stands suddenly from the table, the chair scraping loudly across the floor, the sound sharp and shrill enough to feel like a warning no one asked for but everyone understands. Anneliese grabs Johann's wrist with surprising strength and tells him not to open the door, her voice low and shaking. Not spoken like advice, but like a confession she can no longer keep inside. Matthias looks between his parents, searching their faces for answers, and asks what they are not telling him, while the silence that follows answers before either of them dares to speak. The bell rings again, louder and closer now. Not from the village or the church, but from directly beneath the Keller house, settling into the room as something that can no longer be ignored. Greta gasps as the vibration passes through her body, rattling her chest and making her instinctively protect her belly, even though she cannot explain why the fear feels so immediate. Anneliese crosses herself twice, once for God and once for whatever else might be listening beneath the floorboards, her hands trembling as the room grows heavier around them. Johann stares into the fire with his jaw clenched tight, watching the reflection in the flames twist and blur. until even he cannot tell whether he is seeing guilt or fear. Without another word, Matthias turns and walks down the hallway, each step sounding counted by the house itself, as if it is measuring how far he is willing to go. At the back door, snow has piled into a perfect, unnatural curve, pressed flat and smooth, as if something stood there for a long time, waiting patiently and listening. Greta notices the hoof prints first outside the door, pressed deep into the fresh snow, heavy and deliberate, each step shaped wrong enough to tighten her chest because, even before understanding what they are, her body recognizes they do not belong here. As the trail continues away from the house, the hoof prints slowly change into bare human footprints, and in that moment the night stops, pretending it is only a story, becoming something closer and far more personal than fear. The footprints do not lead away from the house, but toward it, ending abruptly at the wall itself, as if whatever made them no longer required the ground to move, or permission to cross the boundary. Matthias returns to the kitchen, holding an old birch switch from his childhood, something his parents swore had been destroyed years ago, pale and unmistakable in the lantern light, carrying memories he never meant to see again. The bell beneath the floor rings again, slower now and deeper than before, and for the first time it does not sound like a warning, but like recognition, as if something below has finally been acknowledged. Johann insists.
The pipes, Matthias.
The sound is only pipes, his voice
Settle
thin
when
and
the fire's
hurried,
up.
while
Pipes don't
Matthias
rattle
stares
like
back,
that. Not
knowing
up
the
in
Keller
the
house was
same as I
never
do.
built with
That's
pipes
the
at
soul
all,
of both of us.
and that his father
Groans
is
and
lying
shifts,
out of
that's all.
habit.
You don't believe that any more than I do.
The fire still burns in the hearth, but the room grows colder, Greta's breath faintly visible as frost creeps along the inside of the window, signaling that whatever is coming no longer respects the walls. From above them comes the sound of metal scraping slowly across wood. Not the storm or the roof settling, but something heavy being pulled with careful intent, patient and unafraid of being heard. Annalise lowers her gaze to the floorboards and whispers that he is here, and the candle flames tremble as if the room itself has heard her, responding to the name with quiet certainty. Matthias lifts the lantern from its hook, the light suddenly feeling smaller in his hands, and steps toward the cellar hatch, as though drawn there, understanding without words that something below has been waiting. Johann moves quickly to block Matthias from the cellar hatch, planting himself wide and rigid between the lantern light and the floor, protecting something he never intended to keep, driven less by logic than by an old fear he never learned to name. Matthias looks directly at his father and tells him to move, his voice calm and steady, because some decisions are made quietly, and once spoken aloud, they no longer need anger to give them weight. Greta touches Matthias' arm and says she hears something beneath the bell, a thin sound like crying that feels both distant and uncomfortably close, as if it has been traveling through the house for a long time. A framed photograph on the wall rattles suddenly and tilts crooked, responding to a pressure no one can see, as if the house itself is shifting to make room for something passing through. Matthias pulls open the cellar hatch, and cold air spills upward like breath, carrying the smell of damp earth and something sharper and older, as though the house has exhaled the secret it has been holding. The lantern reveals stone steps descending deeper than the house should allow, darkness swallowing the light almost immediately, suggesting that whatever lies below was never meant to be measured or understood. Matthias begins his descent, one careful step at a time, the lantern swinging slowly, shadows lagging behind him as if the dark itself needs time to decide where it wants to settle. Halfway down the stairs, Matthias sees deep gouges carved into the stone wall, layered over one another, too wide for tools and too uneven for hands, marking repeated attempts that never ended well. He touches one of the marks with his gloved hand and recoils, not from cold, but from the absence of warmth, as if nothing living had ever been allowed to exist there. At the bottom of the stairs stands a second door set into stone, older than the cellar itself, carved with faded symbols, worn smooth by decades of fearful hands, checking that it remained closed. Matthias turns back toward the stairs and freezes, as the darkness above thickens briefly, forming a shape that suggests attention, before slipping away as if it was never meant to be seen. Upstairs, Greta kneels and presses her palm to the floorboards, feeling the vibration clearly now, the bell humming directly beneath her hand, close enough to feel personal, and for the first time she understands that whatever is coming already knows where she is. Annelies's prayers spill out faster, the rosary beads clicking together as Johann stands rigid beside her, both of them staring at the same place in the room, aware that words alone will not stop what has already been invited inside. Back below, Matthias studies the worn symbols carved into the stone door and realizes they are not decoration but reassurance, touched again and again by people who needed to believe the barrier mattered, even when it clearly did not. The iron latch twitches once on its own, subtle and deliberate, and the bell answers softly in return, confirming that it has been acknowledged, and that acknowledgement carries consequences none of them can undo. Matthias climbs back into the kitchen with the lantern trembling in his hands, and the way his parents look at him makes it clear he has crossed a line that was never meant to be approached, let alone understood.
Doesn't get another breath.
Matches how
Annelies finally begins to speak, her shoulders sagging as the truth forces its way out, while Johann avoids every gaze and Greta clutches her belly tighter, already fearing what the confession will demand in return.
What did you do?
Outside, the storm intensifies without warning, snow slamming against the house as if the weather itself is reacting to what has been spoken inside, mirroring the way old choices refuse to remain buried. Annelies tells them it happened 30 years ago during a winter that never ended, when roads vanished, food ran out, and the village learned how easily survival could be traded for silence.
That's all I know.
Matthias listens as the story unfolds, disbelief giving way to understanding, while Greta's face drains of color and the room feels smaller because the past is no longer history, it is inheritance. Johann admits he was present when the decision was made, not as the one who chose, but as the one who watched. And that realization settles heavily in the room, because witnessing a crime does not lessen its weight, it only spreads it. Greta asks who it was they gave away, her voice steady, despite the fear beneath it, and the silence that follows answers her more clearly than words ever could, because some truths survive only by remaining unnamed. Before anyone can respond, the bell rings again beneath the floor, slow and deliberate, as if answering the question itself, stripping the room of denial and making it clear that something else has been listening to every word. Johann finally says it was a child, the word reshaping the space around them, because once spoken aloud, it changes the story from survival to theft, and no explanation can return it to what it was before. Annelies nods, once in confirmation, unable to justify the choice any longer, and the fire dims slightly as if the room itself rejects the reasoning she has repeated for decades without believing it. She insists they had no choice, and that the village would have died otherwise, but the bell rings again in response, reminding them that survival achieved through sacrifice does not erase the debt, it only delays its collection. Chains scrape across the roof outside, close enough now to feel through the walls, and Greta turns toward the window, knowing that whatever has been waiting is no longer content to remain unseen or unanswered. The front door handle turns slowly on its own, and Matthias steps instinctively in front of Greta, while Johann hesitates with the poker, realizing too late that tools were never part of the agreement being enforced. The door opens only to blinding white snow and empty air, offering a moment of false relief, because absence does not mean safety. It simply means what is coming has chosen another way inside. The door slams shut by itself, and the candles bend toward the cellar, while Annelies stares at Greta's belly with sudden understanding, realizing the debt has not ended but begun to move forward. The house falls into a silence, so complete it feels intentional, as if a decision has already been made, and the walls themselves are waiting for it to be carried out, leaving everyone inside suspended between what they know and what they are about to lose. From beneath the floorboards comes the sound of slow scratching, deliberate and patient, as if fingers are testing the wood from the other side, learning its weaknesses after years of being denied entry. Matthias backs away until his shoulders touch the wall, realizing the house is no longer shelter or refuge, but an unwilling witness that has finally chosen a side, and that realization strips the room of any remaining sense of safety. Greta gasps as the baby kicks again, not randomly or with fear, but in steady rhythm with the bell, and the implication settles that something old is responding to something new, linking past debt to future consequence, without asking permission. The fireplace poker slips from Johann's hand and rolls across the floor, stopping precisely at the cellar hatch, as if guided there to remind him that resistance was never part of the bargain, only delay in eventual compliance. Annalise rises slowly to her feet, her voice steady despite the terror behind it, and admits that the debt was never paid, only postponed. Because lies can survive for generations, but truth always demands to be collected. The scratching stops without warning and is replaced by a single, careful knock from beneath the cellar hatch, polite enough to feel intentional, as if whatever waits below understands manners better than mercy. Matthias moves instinctively in front of Greta, placing his body between her and the floor, while she grips his coat tightly, both of them understanding that protection now is symbolic, not effective. Two more knocks follow, slower and heavier than the first, and above them, chains gather with purpose, signaling that whatever has waited this long no longer requires permission to arrive. Outside the house, a massive shadow slides down the wall through the storm, tall enough to swallow falling snow, confirming that the night has finally taken form and is no longer content to remain unseen. Frost creeps along the interior walls in thin white veins as the candle flames shrink and struggle, the house reacting not in fear, but in recognition, because it was built to contain something like this and has waited quietly for the moment it returned. The cellar hatch lifts on its own, slow and careful, as if acknowledging the effort it took to keep it closed for so long, before deciding that effort no longer matters, and that patience has finally been rewarded. Krampus climbs the steps without urgency, his antlers brushing the beams as he enters the kitchen, filling the space with weight and certainty, not as a creature arriving, but as a debt finally returning to the place that created it. The bells on his chains ring softly in a measured rhythm, not as a warning or threat, but as a count, marking what was taken, what was hidden, and what remains unpaid despite decades of silence. Matthias stands frozen as Krampus turns his gaze toward him, close enough to feel the air change, realizing that being spared is not mercy, but a reminder that survival itself carries responsibility. Krampus pauses at the top of the cellar steps and tilts his head, listening not to the people in the room, but to the house itself, because the walls, beams, and floorboards have been present for every choice made here. And now they are being asked to testify. The beams creak and the floor groans in response, the Keller house offering up its history without resistance, because structures remember what people deny, and silence does not erase what was built around it. Annalise steps forward, her voice steady despite her shaking body, admitting she was the first to believe the lie, because believing it allowed her to survive without confronting what that survival demanded from someone else.
Not this time.
Krampus lowers his head toward her, his breath frosting her face, judgment delivered without anger or hesitation, because the decision was never his to make, only his to enforce when the time arrived. The bells ring once, heavy and final, and Annalise collapses to her knees as decades of avoidance, justification, and silence finally settle into a single moment that cannot be postponed again. Johann cries out and falls against the table, grief tearing through him too late to change anything, because regret does not undo agreements made in desperation. It only proves they were understood all along. Krampus turns his attention to Matthias and studies him in silence, weighing what was inherited against what was chosen, and recognizing that survival does not absolve responsibility, it extends it forward. Matthias understands then that being spared is not mercy, but permission to live with what remains unresolved, carrying the knowledge forward rather than escaping.
I understand now.
Krampus guides Annalise back toward the cellar with a grip that is firm but careful, returning what was taken rather than claiming something new, because the agreement was precise, unchanged by time, and never intended to expand beyond its original terms. The cellar hatch closes by itself, and the frost retreats from the walls as the storm outside weakens. confirming that payment has been accepted without gratitude or absolution, which leaves the house standing but permanently altered. Johann, Matthias, and Greta stand in the kitchen without speaking. One chair now empty, the space feeling lighter, yet unbearably hollow, because something essential has been removed and nothing has been restored to replace it. Dawn arrives, pale and quiet, fresh snow smoothing over the violence of the night, which allows the world to continue unchanged while the consequences remain contained within those who remember. The villagers emerge slowly from their homes, avoiding one another's eyes and moving with practiced calm, because they heard the bells and understood exactly what kind of accounting had taken place. Matthias and Greta gather their belongings without speaking and leave the house behind, choosing not to look back or explain their departure. Because remaining would require answers and answers would demand responsibilities they are not prepared to accept or inherit. As they walk away along the snow-covered road, Greta suddenly stops, pressing her hand to her belly while confusion tightens her expression, because something inside her has responded to the events of the night in a way that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The sensation within her continues as a faint internal ringing, subtle enough to doubt yet persistent enough to command attention, indicating that the process set in motion beneath the house has not concluded but shifted to a different stage. Matthias watches Greta's expression change and understands that leaving the village did not end their involvement, because consequences attached to survival do not dissolve through distance or time. Far beneath the Keller house, a single bell swings in the darkness and rings once, marking the completion of one exchange and the registration of another without judgment or emotion. Winter loosens its grip on the mountains, and the village continues unchanged. On the surface, because endurance depends on routine rather than resolution. What remains is not punishment or closure, but continuation. As memory persists, obligation transfers, and the cycle proceeds without requiring belief or acknowledgement. If this story followed you into the dark, make sure it follows you back. Subscribe for more stories that refuse to stay buried.